Thanks for joining me. My name is Lauren Cruz, and we are continuing through the study of Strength of a Woman, Why You Are, Proverbs 31. And we're going through this passage, which is an acrostic poem of the Hebrew alphabet. That means every verse starts with a different letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And today we're going to cover 3 verses, 3 letters. We're going to start with Proverbs 31:18, which begins with tet. We're going to go on to 31:19 and 31:20, which actually 19 and 20 signal a new section, and they discuss 2 words or 2 images that have the image of a hand. And so we're going to talk about yud and kuf or kaf. So let's begin by reading through those sections. I'm going to start with Proverbs 31:19. Okay. Actually 31:18. Proverbs 31:18. She senses that her gain is good. Her lamp does not go out at night. 31:19. She stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hands grasp the spindle. 31:20. She's not afraid of us. I messed up. 31:20. She extends her hand to the poor, and she stretches out her hands to the needy. I probably should put my reading glasses on. All right, so let's take a look at the first one. So Proverbs 31:18 begins with the letter tet. And tet actually has the image of a snake. Probably doesn't sound too great or glamorous for the Proverbs 31 woman, but it actually wraps up 3 verses that relate to spiritual battle. And I've mentioned this before, that Proverbs 31 has a theme of the military strength. There's 2 primary themes, military and the priesthood, or the priestly activities in the tabernacle. So the tet is a verse. This verse wraps up 3 that kind of relate to that military theme. And think about a snake. So, it talks about how she senses that her gain is good. So that word sense is actually the first word. And it think about what a snake does when it crawls on its ground. When it's crawling on the ground, it usually determines or senses, discerns where it's going by flicking its tongue, right? And so that's how we get that word sense. So she's discerning, she's tasting, if you will. It's actually the same word in the verse that says, taste and see that the Lord is good, right? Sense, discern, taste, and see that the Lord is good. So that's where that idea of a snake comes in. She's kind of doing reconnaissance work, right? We've talked about this, how she's kind of testing the soil of where she's going to plant her family and what activities she's going to get involved in. Well, she's also tasting. She's giving it a taste test. So she's got to kind of get up close and personal to things to kind of test and taste where she's getting involved in. So it's the Hebrew word tamah. It's the same word as taste and see, and that's from Psalm 34:8. And also the Hebrew word night, it's the word leil. So it says that she senses that her gain is good. And that word gain, again, another nod to the military. It's the spoils of war. So she's doing that reconnaissance work. She's constantly testing. She's constantly giving things a taste test to check the gains of her work and gains of the work that she's doing. Her lamp does not go out at night. So here we're actually taking a little bit of a shift. Lamp. And night. So leil has the idea of kind of folding up and tucking away, but also coiling up. So again, if you think of a snake, you know how a snake will kind of coil up. If it's kind of trying to retreat from something, they kind of coil up on themselves. Night is kind of the same idea. God is kind of folding up or coiling up and tucking it away so that the sun can rise. Night is, and then snakes kind of have that same thing. But also think about darkness. We think of physical darkness, but also that metaphorical darkness in our life, right? And sometimes we tend to recoil and fold ourselves up and recoil, fold ourselves away from darkness. And, when we face the darkness of life, we're going to want that lamp. And the word lamp here, let me see if I can make sure I have the right word. It's got a little bit of a word play. The word lamp is the same word that is used in the temple. It's the same oil lamps that were to be lit in the temple and to continuously burn. So again, we've got the military reference, but then in the same verse, we've got the reference to the temple and the priestly duties. And so let me see if I can find my little quote that I wanted to read to you guys. The Hebrew word for lamp is nair. It's traditionally used to reference the lamp in the tabernacle. They were to continually burn before the Lord, never to be extinguished. So when the Proverbs 31:18 notes that her lamp does not go out at night, it references the responsibilities of the Old Testament priests. And so like the priests, the strong woman keeps her lamp burning perpetually. She is a light in the night. And so not only bringing light to her home, but also light in the darkness. And we know that Yeshua stated that he is the light of the world. And did you know that he made that statement in John against the backdrop of the feast of Sukkot? At the end of the feast, at the very end of it, it's celebrate, the whole feast is celebrated to commemorate the time that God provided for the Israelites as they wandered in the desert. The 7 days, it's finalized with a big ceremony that's generally enacted in total darkness, right? Everyone would enter into the Temple Mount area. And on the Temple Mount, there were these huge, gigantic menorahs in the corners of each of the Temple Mount. I mean, you'd have to use a ladder to get up there. So everyone would enter into the Temple Mount under the darkness, in the dark. And at a given sound, I don't know if they blew the shofar or a cheer rose up or something, but right at the exact same moment, the priests were instructed to light the menorahs at the same time. And then light would fill the temple court area, and they kindled the fires on that great candelabra, and it would light up Jerusalem almost as if it were enough light for the middle of the day. So the next day, like the day after this ceremony was done, Jesus was standing in the temple area, and that's when he made the proclamation that he was the light of the world. And so he's saying this against the backdrop of this Feast of Sukkot and how they lit up the area in the Temple Mount. And so, she is constantly giving her the acts of her, the acts and how she serves her family and what she's doing to provide for her family and to lead and to train and to guide and to plant her family. She's giving things a taste test. She's always taste and see not only that the Lord is good, but also her behavior and her modeling and what she's involved in. And she's not going to shirk back from those metaphorical times of darkness or the darkness of life, because she has her lamp, right? She constantly has that lamp kindled and ready, and it is never extinguished. And so I think that's an interesting lesson that we too can learn even today, and how we approach our families, and how do we allow our light to shine. Is our light, when we extend that light to others, Is it a warm beacon that is welcoming others, you know, kind of like the beacon of a lighthouse? Or is it a glaring spotlight that's going to, you know, cause people to kind of shirk back and not want that light exposing anything? So something to think about. How is your lamp shining? The next one is she stretches out her hands to the distaff and she grasps her hands to the spindle. And I'll go ahead and continue. She extends her hands to the poor. She stretches out her hands to the needy. So I've mentioned before that Proverbs 31 is a chiastic poem. That means that the Proverbs 31:10 parallels Proverbs 31:31, and they parallel each other until we get to the middle verse, which is going to be the one about her husband is known at the city gates. That's Proverbs 31:23. That's the main idea of the passage. So we know it's a chiastic poem. We also know it's an acrostic poem. That means every verse starts with a different letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Okay, so here's another really cool thing, and the English teacher in me is totally geeking out. In this section, this little 2 verses is a quatrain, which means there's 4 references to hands. So it actually says Yud, Kaf, Kaf, Yud. There's 4 references in a quatrain to the hands. And so there's actually 2 words in Hebrew for hand. One is Yud, and that's this verse. The other is Kaf, and we'll talk about that in a second. So the difference is Yud is kind of the open hand, and you know, the kind of the forearm, and it designates ownership and what I hold and authority and control. So like these are my hand, like this is a Yud, right? This is what I'm holding and this is what I'm owning. So Yud is ownership. So it says that she stretches out her hands to the distaff and her hand grasps the spindle. So these are all references to, you know, textile work and weaving. And once upon a time, you know, weaving was quite an art. If you guys do any kind of crochet or needlepoint, you know the practice that it takes to create these beautiful textiles, these blankets. You know, if you're a thrifter in any way, the big thing now is to find the old needle prints and to, you know, to have those framed and in your home. You know, it's kind of, you know, there are a hot commodity in the thrift stores now is to find all these old needle points, you know, because that is a dying art. Not a lot of us do that anymore. And, you know, you might have heard the phrase a spinster. You know, to call somebody a spinster is not necessarily in today's time a compliment, but if you do, if you just look up that word and you do a little bit of a word search, word study on that, to call somebody a spinster actually was kind of a compliment. It was complimenting just the quality of her work as a weaver. It's just acknowledging and identifying that she just had great skills, mad skills as a textile worker. And it's kind of important too. This Proverbs 31 woman was married, and obviously there's references to servants or to help. And she didn't have to do the weaving, right? That could have been something that she would have delegated to a servant, but yet she's doing it. She's actually qualified. She has the authority, and this is a skill that she is definitely recognized for. So the other thing to kind of important to note, not only is she taking it upon herself to do this, you know, to take the authority to do this skill, and she's recognized for it. You know, the distaff and the spindle, those are different parts of the weaving. And so the distaff and the spindle would, you know, the shuttle that you would move through the weaving, you know, kind of think about it like this. Okay, and I'm just going to highlight it a little more like this. Maybe it's beginning to look like something else. Kind of like an orchestra, or the director of an orchestra. And I think that might be the link to Yud. Okay, we have such an authority in our home, right? We are the orchestras and the directors of our home. We do the weaving into our families, right? We're the ones who direct those shuttles, the spindles and the distaffs in our family. And if you look at a tapestry, on one side, it's beautiful, right? Those needleworks that we're looking for in the thrift store, it's because the work is just beautiful. The quality and the different stitches and the colors and the way everything comes together is just an incredible tapestry. But if you flip that over, what do the backs usually look like? You know, if you've not done that, they're a hot mess, right? There's strings everywhere. There's crisscrosses and strings attaching there's knots and, you know, I mean, when I used to do needlepoint, I would get down to almost the last little bit of the thread. It's almost too small before I could even tie the knot off. And, you know, sometimes I would wait too long and then I'd have to unravel a few of my stitches to get enough to tie things off. So, you know, as lovely as those tapestries are, there's always another side that's not quite as pretty. And I think I can relate that to my family too. You know, to look at us from the outside, boy, we've got it together. But when you flip it over and you look at the backside of things, it's not always a pretty thing, right? But the thread that keeps us together is because we as parents, me as a mom, my husband as a dad, you know, we have taken the time to weave into our family. You know, our grandparents have woven into us to teach us the skills and those foundations and the traditions of our family, the importance. You know, we take the time to teach and to homeschool and to make sure our kids have that foundation of faith and understanding and learning. And so, you know, that's the backside of the tapestry. And sometimes it's not hard. Those kids do not want to sit still. They do not want to, you know, but we're chasing them down, and the strings and the threads are going everywhere as we're trying to just kind of hold it together and weave into them, weave into their hearts, and just creating a beautiful tapestry that in the end, when we get to the final product, they turn out much more beautiful. And so we have the authority, we have the yud, we have the ownership and the authority to do that. Now the next letter is kaf, and it's actually a different word for hand. And it says that she extends her hands to the poor and she stretches out her hands to the needy. And so I think it's interesting that kaf is an open palm. It's actually, you know, the cupped shape, and it goes all the way down to your forearm, and it represents service, right? So extending your hand to the needy and reaching out your hand to the poor is someone who is serving somebody else. But I'll also tell you this, kaf can represent a wing. And so think about it, like if you're like this, these are your wings, like your little chicken wings, right? And so kaf also represents that covering. And think about if you guys have ever done the creation gospel, the words have the wings and the covering. And so what comes to mind, if I ever think of wings in the Bible, I tend to think of angels, right? That might be my first idea. And angels are the covering spirits. They are on the Ark of the Covenant, right? The wings overlap and they cover the presence and the glory of God. And even Yeshua says, you know, "O Jerusalem, how I desire to gather you under my wings and to protect you." And for us to have that covering of the Holy Spirit and the covering of God as we tuck ourselves up underneath the protective covering of his wings. And even, you know, to have the faith so strong just to touch the winged corner of, you know, the prayer shawl. And I mean, all of that is, you know, represented in this. And so she's extending her hand to the poor, and she's reaching out and stretching out her hand to the needy. And another thought that comes to mind, you know, whenever I hear the poor and needy, is those that are poor in spirit, right? Those are truly the ones that are deprived, and the ones that are in poverty are the ones that are poor in spirit. they have the greatest need. And so what better than to be the one who can extend my hand in service to those, right? Because I have the authority to do that. I have the teaching and I have the understanding, but now I can extend my hand in service to them and to provide a need that, I can provide for that need that they have. I can provide for their poverty in extending the covering, the ultimate covering that they need, the covering of Yeshua's blood to ensure that they can be in his presence and to enjoy, his reign in their heart. And so there's that, right? And isn't that us as moms? Our greatest thing is to not only have that authority to weave into our family, but the whole goal is to act as priests, which, by the way, begins with the letter Kuf. It's the word Cohen. And if you look at the word pictures for a priest, it means someone who holds and molds, right? So the duties of the priest were to kind of mold the hearts of the Israelites and to kind of mold the hearts and the faith of the people. And that's really our job too as moms and as Proverbs 31 women, whether we have children or not, those that are under our influence and those who we are weaving into and those who we are reaching out to, we have that same responsibility to kind of, hold and mold and to teach and to lead and to guide and to, continue the work and to be the disciples that we're called to be, to extend, the grace that God offers to help in others' poverty and to help in others who have such a great need. And so I think that's an interesting way to look at this Proverbs 31. It's just very, very different. I think it's a great way to have an understanding of the strength of this woman. The strength is only when we're yoked to Yeshua and only when we're drawing on the strength of our Father and only when we're constantly taste testing and taking soil samples and exercising our authority, but yet doing it in a way that's serving others. I mean, that's the true definition of a servant leader, right? Is having that servant's heart where you have authority, but yet you're doing it in such a way that you're serving others as well. And Yeshua was a great example of one who is a true servant leader. And so and again, with that idea of Kof and the covering and the angels covering the Ark of the Covenant, we've got yet another nod to the priestly duties and the priesthood and the tabernacle. And so, don't miss out on that. We definitely, and the weaving, what was she weaving when she was working on as a spinster? What was she weaving? She could have just been making those belts and coverings that's mentioned in Proverbs 31, but she also could have been working on tapestries that are hanging in the holy place. So lots of things to look at, lots of ways to look at it. Don't be afraid of the dark times in our night, the dark times in our life, because we always have the lamp of Yeshua. He is the light of our world. He grants us authority to be priests in our kingdoms here on earth, right? Our families and all that we rule and all that we minister to as priests. But also he gives us the opportunity to reach out and serve others so that we can hold, mold, and shape them to be disciples as well. And so I hope that you learned something today through our discussion of Strength of a Woman. And next time we will be touching on the next few letters will be Lamed, which is that ox goad, which is like another nod to teaching, Mem, which is water, and Nun, which is fish and life. And actually Nun is the main idea for this passage. So when we hit Nun, we'll be halfway through the passage and we'll be taking a turn. So thanks for joining me today. If you guys have any questions, jump on Ban. I follow Ban as well, and I can look at any questions you might have. Any insight that you gleaned, anything that you've noticed as you've read through Proverbs 31, any verse that speaks to you. If any of these verses that we covered today are your favorites, let me know. A lot of people ask about these verses, because they don't really apply to us so much as 21st century women. Like I personally only know 2 crocheting stitches, right? My daughter does crochet. She didn't learn it from me. She learned it from YouTube. So, how could these verses possibly apply to me? So I hope maybe in our discussion today, you learned something new and you might be able to share it with others. So thanks for joining us. God bless.